So this is the third TEDxStoga event we have had this year, and the last two have been really, really successful. We're really, really excited to give you some really awesome talks today, and we are starting off with Jahnavi Kishore, who I believe is the first sophomore this year to give a talk. She will be talking about nature of emergencies. So give it up for Jahnavi.
Good morning. Okay, so my talk is, what's the nature of the emergency? Really quick before we start, a couple of good questions to start thinking about as we get into the talk, just to see where this is all going to end up. So why are our emergency rooms so crowded? What have we tried, and what can we do to fix it? There we go. Okay. So, excuse me. Good morning. As you can see, I'm slightly nervous. All right. So this is the typical scene for an emergency room that you would see on a busy day. It's actually not very uncommon for most people who visit the emergency room for any reason to be stuck in waiting rooms like this for a long time. The first time I ever went to an emergency room, I was in 4th grade, and I went through a gymnastics kit, and during practice one day I broke my hand. And I was sat in an emergency room like this for 5 hours, waiting to get my hand fixed by a doctor. Well, not fixed, but like set. Whatever. This trend of seeing emergency rooms so cramped up like this started around the mid-1990s, so about 20 years ago. It was a little bit confusing for people at the CDC because they didn't see a rise in so many conditions or accidents that would require people to visit an emergency room, because that's what emergency rooms are for. They're for whenever you have an emergency, when you have an acute condition that's causing you immediate distress. Instead, they decided to take a look at why so many people were visiting the emergency rooms. What reasons do they have for being there? And they found that a lot of people had chronic symptoms, symptoms that weren't immediate and didn't need emergency attention. So they figured, let's try and tell people that if you're experiencing a chronic condition, or if you're experiencing chronic symptoms, symptoms that aren't so dangerous to you right at this very minute, we're going to try and encourage those people to go and visit their primary care physicians instead of coming into the emergency room and cramming everything up whenever we have people who actually need emergency care. So they came up with two logics that they were going to try and use to convince the public that if you're experiencing these, go to your primary care instead. The first idea was to encourage people, as I said before, who are experiencing chronic symptoms or have a pre-existing condition to go and visit their primary care physician. The second was that they wanted to inform the public that physicians that are familiar with a patient's background would be better able to give care to them. Okay, so for the first idea, ideas of chronic conditions or of pre-existing conditions, I'm going to use something that I'm very familiar with. It's a condition that I have called iron deficiency anemia. Some general symptoms are fatigue, weakness, pale skin, shortness of breath, dizziness, cravings for non-food items, dirt, ice, clay, etc., and swelling of the tongue. It's not very fun. Some of these symptoms are a bit characteristic of the condition, like the tingling in the legs and the craving for eating dirt. Not many things make you want to eat dirt. But some of these are pretty common symptoms. Most illnesses that you have are going to make you feel weak and tired. There's a very, 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 very long list, of which these are only a few, of symptoms that include weakness, paleness, and fatigue. And they can range from extremity, from type 2 diabetes, just down to being stressed. So they figured if you have a pre-existing condition, which share these kinds of chronic symptoms that are very common, then you should probably go into your primary care physician because they have the knowledge in advance that you have this condition. They can probably diagnose it faster for you, and it'll be less hassle for the emergency room to have to go through all those steps to try and diagnose you when you already have a primary care physician who knows all of this about you and has it in your medical record. keep in mind that this was happening in the mid-1990s. It's not very easy back then to share medical information, not nearly as easy as it is now. So that was their first logic. Now their second logic was that a physician familiar with your societal background and your familial background and your personal background would have an advantage in taking care of you. And one of the major examples that they used was a recent event in that time. Around the early 1990s, 90, 91, 92, there was an outbreak in syphilis in the west and east sides of Baltimore. The biggest issue with syphilis there was that there were some health cutbacks. A lot of primary care physicians lost their jobs, and so did many ER technicians and physicians as well. And because of the lack of physicians who were familiar with patients intimately and knew what their behaviors were, it was more difficult for ER physicians to diagnose syphilis early, and that meant more people were going on to spread their syphilis to other people. Some mothers gave birth to children while they had syphilis, who then, in turn, received congenital syphilis, and thus the case of syphilis went way up. So people at the CDC said, take a look at what happened in Baltimore a couple of years ago. We don't want that to happen. We want to have a lot of people going to physicians who are familiar with them and familiar with the societies from which they come from, so that this kind of outbreak doesn't really happen again. So that started to work. People were seeing more and more primary care physicians, but it didn't solve the issue of cramped up emergency rooms. If anything, the number of emergency room visits was going higher and higher every year. The reason why that didn't work is because as soon as one problem seemed to be being fixed, another one came along, and that was an economic crisis. This graph was filled with data from 2009. Look. Oh, that is not what I wanted to do at all. All right, sorry about that.
You got it.
Thank you. Okay, so down here at the bottom, blue graph, quick little background. There's something called an economic threshold that every family in America has. Your threshold is how much money your family would need in order to stay above poverty level in the United States. For a family of 3, it would be about $24,000 a year to stay above poverty. So any family who makes less than their economic threshold in their yearly income would be considered below 100% of their threshold. And any family who makes 4 times or more their threshold would be considered in the bottom group, 400% or higher. If you look at it, it says people below poverty line make up twice as many visits to the emergency room as people who are 400% or more above the poverty line. Now, in the area that we live, it's not entirely uncommon to be 15, 20, 25% the amount, not percent, times your threshold. So you'd be around 20,000% instead of 400% above your threshold. But if you drive a couple miles down from here, it's not uncommon to find everyone in your neighborhood being below the poverty line. So we're going to play a little game. We're going to say, I'm going to ask you, how much do you think, without insurance, it costs to visit your primary care physician for one visit? Does anyone have a guess? Yeah? It's a little bit less. It's $100 per visit. That was good. So, like I said, if there was a family of 3 who was at or below the poverty line, let's say they're at the poverty line, making $24,000 a year total, that's about $2,000 per month. If one of them is sick, they're not likely to be spending $100 going to go see a primary care physician when they could just go to the ER, and they're guaranteed some form of treatment there. Now, if you do go to the ER, you're probably going to be diagnosed with something. There's probably something wrong with you, or else you wouldn't be in the ER. So we're going to continue with the game. How much do you think 10 milligrams of Zyrtec would cost without insurance? Anyone have a guess? You're raising your hands. I know it's early, but please, guys. Yeah?
15.
No, not quite. Not quite. No. Oh, sorry. Without insurance, it costs about $30 to $40 depending on your vendor. Who you get it from, that's how much 10 milligrams of Zyrtec costs. You're not going to use Zyrtec year-round unless your allergies are really, really, really bad. So doesn't seem like too much, but $30 to $40 out of someone who's making $2,000 a month can be quite a substantial amount. It can mean eating. 10 milligrams of Crestor, that's for high cholesterol. It's another thing that's pretty common in demographics of people who are at or below the poverty line because of their health choices. So how much do you think 10 milligrams of Crestor would cost? Yeah. No. Anyone else? 20? No, not 20. Remember, this is without insurance.
40.
No. Without insurance, 10 milligrams of Crestor costs about $260 a month. $260 is already over a tenth of someone at the poverty line with a three-person family. It's already a tenth of their monthly income. This is a Lanistar Solastar insulin pen. My dad has type 2 diabetes, so I'm intimately familiar with this. How much do you think one of these pens is going to cost someone? No, getting a little ahead of yourselves. Okay. Each of these pens is going to cost $100. And one of these pens will last a little bit less than a week. So it's $400 per month for someone to take care of their insulin. Most people with type 2 diabetes don't just use insulin to take care of their diabetes. They also take things like Crestor to maintain to reduce their high cholesterol. So if we're talking $400 for your insulin, almost $300 for your Crestor, that's $700 out of the $2,000 you're making in a month. That is a lot of money. Just insulin alone is a fifth of a person at the poverty line's monthly income. Now let's say you go to the doctor and something's really wrong. Maybe you're diagnosed with breast cancer. Herceptin is one of the most common drugs for treatment of breast cancer, and it's also one of the cheapest. How much do you think it's going to cost for a month? Not for a month. Herceptin for 1 month costs $6,000. That's 3 times a person's monthly income. To complete a year-long cycle, it's $70,000. People at the poverty line really can't afford to pay that. That's 3 times their yearly income. So what are we going to do about this? The reason why so many people are visiting the ER these days is because they don't have the money to go and visit what other people are suggesting. They don't have the money to go and visit their primary care physicians because they're spending all their money either paying for their food, for their rent, for their water, or spending all their money paying for the money that they were told to pay for the medicine they were given or the medicine that they were prescribed. This means that in order to reduce, the visits to emergency rooms, we need to look deeper within this. We need to look and see why so many people are visiting emergency rooms. Well, that's an economic crisis right now. Well, then how can we fix that economic crisis? It's something that needs to change. And unfortunately, change is a big part of this. If we fix this issue, another one is bound to come up because change is inevitable. And we need to be able to meet that change when it comes. We need to be able to answer the question to ourselves, what is the nature of our emergency today? All right, thank you.